someone, a lecturer, a speaker who goes up on the pulpit and delivers a sermon, or someone who goes on TV and mentions a narration. And because I trust him, I hold him, I consider him to be reliable. And he's heard it from someone else, he considers him to be reliable. And that person's heard it from a third person or a fourth person, and he's reliable, and therefore the narration is considered to be authentic, because the chain of narrators are all reliable individuals. So this is the most obvious means of transmitting narrations and authenticating those narrations. However, and I mentioned Al-Kafi because Al-Kafi is by far the single most important collection of traditions in the Shia school of thought. Now, as you know, Al-Kafi was compiled by the great scholar known as Shaykh al-Islam, Shaykh al-Kulayni. May Allah be pleased with him. Shaykh al-Kulayni was a great scholar who lived in the 4th century. He was an individual who was considered to be not only reliable, but also one of the highest ranking scholars at the time was Shaykh al-Kulayni, and he was the one who compiled the book. So we trust him, right? But then the question arises as to whether or not he was able to determine the authenticity of these narrations that he's compiled in this book in a proper manner. So the people that preceded him, were they reliable? The means of transmission of these narrations between him and between Shaykh al-Kulayni and those who preceded him, were those means reliable? Because what might happen, obviously, is that a narration might be recorded in a book, and then the book could be eaten by termites, and certain portions of a tradition could be lost. Or the book could have certain pages in it missing. Or the ink might have been erased or smudged in certain areas in those books. And you know, these ancient books, we're talking about really, really old books that were written using very primitive means and written on, certain types of paper or goat skin or what have you. And of course, the chance of these writings being obscured or erased or completely destroyed was a lot. The chance was very high. And so the question is no longer really about the reliability of these individuals, but rather about the reliability of the means of transmission. And to this we reply that the very first, let's go back to the basics. Let's go back to the very first time traditions were recorded. The very first time they were recorded was when the Imams, the second half of our 12 Imams, they began instructing their companions to record whatever they told them. And so their companions began writing down the traditions as they were being dictated by the Imams. So there's no chance of any error, no chance of any mistakes. The Imam is speaking, the companion is writing down what the Imam is saying. After a while, these narrations that were written down by the companions, directly having been dictated by the Imams, they were collected together. And that collection of books was later named Al-Usul Al-Arba'mi'ah. Al-Usul means the fundamentals, the 400 fundamentals. They were called the 400 fundamentals because they comprise the fundamental components of our creed as Shia Muslims. They were the first narrations to be written down and recorded on paper, or one of the first. There were obviously more narrations back in the time of the Prophet, and we'll talk more about that later on. People were always writing down narrations, but it wasn't as widespread and it wasn't as organized and as systematic as this effort, which eventually led to the collection known as the 400 Fundamentals. The 400 Fundamentals there was not a scratch of doubt, not a shadow of doubt as to their authenticity. Because, like I said, they were narrated by the imams, they were written down by the companions directly, on the spot. So then, certain individuals, after the time of the imams, great scholars, they took these 400 fundamentals and they would sit down and teach them to their students. They would have their own circle of students. They would have these closed sessions, and oftentimes, as you know, they were very much persecuted and they were sought after by the oppressive governments, and so they had to go underground. On many occasions, they had to be very secretive in holding these sessions. We're not talking about public sessions all the time. And so the people they selected to be their close, students, their close protégés, so to speak, they were handpicked by these scholars to make sure that this knowledge wasn't being disseminated in the wrong circles, was not going to end up in the wrong hands. And so they would have these students, they'd sit down, they'd teach them. They would be very close to their students. Oftentimes you'll notice that the opinion of many of these students resembles that of their teachers. The relationship that they enjoyed between student and teacher was very, very close. It was a very strong bonding that brought together the teacher and the student. Unlike this day and age when I might go to school or I go to college and I have this lecture or I have that student. Yes, the teacher leaves an impact on my life, but it's not a very lasting impact. It's unfortunately the school systems have changed in such a way where there is no real bonding between teacher and student. The student goes to school because he has to, and he sits there, for a few hours. He learns a thing or two from this teacher and that teacher, and usually they mock the teachers a great deal. They make a lot of fun of them. It's not a very close relationship, to say the very least. Oftentimes you may run across an individual, a lecturer or a teacher or a tutor, who you feel very close to, and you forge that friendship with him rather than just the professional relationship of teacher and student. But back in those days, it was very different. Back in those days, it was a very close relationship that they enjoyed. And it was more of two individuals really living together in the same institution, the same establishment. And they would learn from this teacher. They would have a great deal of admiration, a great deal of respect towards this teacher, which is something that our religious teachings, they teach us to be that way. They teach us to be respectful towards our teachers, and they took those teachings very, very seriously back then. So this relationship between a teacher and a student was called a mashyakha. Mashyakha means that this teacher is not just my teacher, but my sheikh. My sheikh meant that he would be my instructor. He is my mentor. He is my my lifelong teacher. Not just someone that I get together with on a daily basis for an hour to learn from, but someone that I imitate. You see what I'm saying here? They used to imitate their teachers. They used to study their teachers. Not just study the subject matter, but study the teacher himself or herself. Study their conduct. Which is why, you'll notice that specifically in the Shia school of thought, we have so many stories of our great scholars. The reason for that, and there are so many books that deal with that subject matter, the reason for that is because these students, they followed their teacher all the time. Wherever the teacher went, they followed them. They would go and study in their homes. And this exists to this very, very day. In our day and age, if you go back to the more traditional seminary institutions, in the holy city of Karbala, or the holy city of Najaf, or the holy city of Qum, and the holy city of Mashhad, and elsewhere, you'll find that a lot of these great scholars, and I've seen this myself time and time again, where you go to a very high-ranking cleric, someone who is very highly regarded in the religious establishment, someone who's, you know, at a very high esteem in terms of their scholarly status, and you ask them for a class that is much lower than what they're used to teaching in the seminary, and they have absolutely no problem in coming down to that level. Even though you're just a first or second year seminary student, they don't mind, you know, turning back the clock 30 years